So what we're going to do is we're going to work through these different processes, and we'll keep coming back to this summary to remind ourselves of how far we are on the journey of how a plant reproduces. We've got gamete formation, making the pollen, making the eggs, pollination, which is how the male gamete gets the female one, then fertilization when they fuse together, then you make the seed and the fruit, then you disperse that seed, and hopefully then you get the germination and the offspring being fully produced. Now, in order to understand this process, we've got to look at the anatomy of a flower, and we've got to go through the different parts and what their roles are. So first of all, we'll start with the male bits. Now, the male bits of a flower are the anther and the filament, and collectively they're known as the stamen. The anther is where the pollen is produced, and the filament just holds that anther in position there. And there's usually quite a lot of anthers producing lots and lots of pollen. We've also got the petals. Obviously, the petals are there to entice in the insects, the bees and things like that, to say, look over here, come and get some nectar, which will be down at the bottom of the flower for them to come and get. And it just so happens that when they come in to get the nectar, the nice sugary drink, they rub against some of the pollen, and they then will fly off to another flower and deposit that pollen there. Where they'll deposit the pollen is on the female part of the flower, and they'll deposit it at the stigma, which is the top bit there of the flower in the center. The stigma is connected to the ovary via the style, and the ovary is where you'll find the ovules, and inside the ovules is where you find the actual ova, the eggs. And together, all the female bits is called the carpel. So that's where gametes are produced. The pollen is produced in the anther, and the ova are found inside the ovules. So how does pollination occur then? Well, I said either it can happen via a insect or via the wind. But what has to happen is the pollen has to be transferred from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another. Then it would be called cross-pollination. Occasionally you can get self-pollination where flowers pollinate themselves, but like I said, it's not ideal. So we really want to go from one flower to another. Now, when you look at pollination, you realise there's actually two types of flowers. You probably never noticed the second type of flowers because they're pretty boring. You will have noticed insect pollinated flowers. They've got a beautiful colour, big petals, and they produce the nice smell, the scent. You probably never really noticed wind pollinated flowers. You see these really on things like grasses. That's because they don't have nice petals, they don't have a scent, they don't use insects, there's no point producing them. So we can compare and contrast the structures of insect pollinated flowers and wind pollinated flowers. So insect pollinated flowers, they've got bright petals, as I said, for attracting insects. They've got a scent, they have a sticky stigma for the pollen to stick to, and they've got the anthers there, and they're all enclosed inside that flower so the insect rubs against them. They also produce nectar for the actual insects to have as their meal. That's their treat for going to the flower. If you look at a wind pollinated flower, very different. No bright petals, no scent, no nectaries, big stigma which is all kind of feathery, and that's to catch the pollen as it floats across in the wind. Also, the anthers dangle down outside of the main flower so that again the wind hits them and knocks all that pollen off. The pollen grains themselves are very inflated and small, so they get carried by the wind and blown long distances. So here's a really important table. There's so many questions that come up in the IGCSE about the comparing and contrasting these two types of flower and how they are adapted for different types of pollination.